Good day, Prof. Lalin, and to the Object M11. Our topic to be discussed for today is all about institutional history of schools, corporations, industries, religions, and groups. I am Vivian B. Barrios, your presenter. Key Issues in Philippine Education by Philippine Network Foundation Incorporated 1996. Literacy rate in the Philippines has improved a lot over the last few years from 72% in 1960 to 94% in 1990. This is attributed to the increase in both the number of schools built and the level of enrollment in these schools. The number of schools grew rapidly in all three levels: elementary, secondary, and tertiary. From the mid-1960s up to the early 1990s, there was an increase of 58% in the elementary schools and 362% in the tertiary schools. For the same period, enrollment in all three levels also rose by 120%. More than 90% of the elementary schools and 60% of the secondary schools are publicly owned. However, only 28% of the tertiary schools are publicly owned. A big percentage of tertiary level students enroll in and finish commerce and business management courses. Table 1 shows the distribution of courses taken based on school year 1990 to 1991. Note that the difference between the number of enrollees in the commerce and business courses and in the engineering and technology courses may be small to 29.2% of commerce and business and 20.3% for engineering and technology. However, the gap widens in terms of the number of graduates for the said courses. Aside from the numbers presented above, which are impressive, there is also a need to look closely and resolve the following important issues. 1. Quality of education. 2. Affordability of education. 3. Government budget for education. And 4. Education mismatch. Quality. For example, the results of standard tests conducted among elementary and high school students, as well as in the National College of Entrance examination for college students, were way below the target mean score. Affordability. For example, the socioeconomically disadvantaged students have higher dropout rates, especially in the elementary level, and most of the freshman students at the tertiary level come from a relatively well-off families. For the budget, the Philippine Constitution has mandated the government to allocate the highest proportion of its budget to education. However, the Philippines still has one of the lowest budget allocations to education among the ASEAN countries. For the mismatch, there is a large proportion of mismatch between training and actual jobs. This is also the major problem at the tertiary level, and it is also the cause of the existence of a large group of educated, unemployed, or underemployed. The 7 key issues and problems of Philippine education. Number 1. Deteriorating quality of education. There are multiple factors which have led to low educational standards. Studies and fact-finding commissions have shown that the deteriorating quality of education is due to the low government budget for education. Poor quality of teachers, poor management of schools, poor school facilities such as laboratory and library facilities, poor learning environment, the content of the curriculum, inadequate books and science equipment, the poor method of instruction, shortages of classrooms, and others. For the quality of education, for the 3 factors, the Philippines scored 31st for appeal, 61st for investment and development, and 26th for readiness. Similarly, last year the Philippines scored lowest for investment and development. Colonial, feudal, imperial, commercial, and elitist orientation in Philippine education. A rather sweeping indictment is that the Philippine educational system has been and still is basically American in orientation and objectives. Even now, despite years of independence, Our educational system has not succeeded in eliminating the chronic colonial mentality, which abounds like a mental blight within or without the academe. At present, quality education is financial capacity based, making higher education more of a privilege rather than a right. Shortage of school buildings, textbooks, and equipment. The shortages of classrooms and textbooks are particularly severe. The nationwide classroom shortage is estimated to be 40,000 and DECS, now DepEd, operates two shifts in many schools. The textbook problem is even more serious. A survey done in preparation for a World Bank education loan found that the pupil textbook ration in the public elementary school is 10:1, and 79% of the textbooks are more than 5 years old. This situation has persisted for many years. Overworked and underpaid teaching staff. The fact that teachers are paid subsistence wages is only half of their sad story. Their daily bout with dilapidated classrooms, overcrowded classes, and lack of teaching materials, among others, make the teachers' hardly rewarded work even more difficult. The bilingual policy in education aims to develop a Filipino who is proficient in both English and Filipino. The findings of the Ateneo Social Weather Survey that 92% of Filipinos already speak and understand Tagalog. Many provinces north and south of Metro Manila still encounter problems with the language. This is unfortunate because Filipino is used in nationally conducted exams and tests, while the bilingual policy is a law which not even the Secretary of Education can change. It has become a growing concern that many students are deficient in communication skills. The major problem of the tertiary level is the large proportion of the so-called mismatch between training and actual jobs, as well as the existence of a large group of educated unemployed or underemployed. The literature points out that this could be the result of a rational response to a dual label market where one sector is import substituting and highly protected with low wages. Graduates may choose to wait it out until a job opportunity in the high-paying sectors comes. The so-called Philippines 2000 was launched by the Philippine government to promote global competitiveness. Philippine Education 2000 carried it to effect through training of more skilled workers and surplus Filipino human power for foreign corporations to reduce their cost of production. The WBIMF and the Ford Foundation have earmarked $400 million for Philippine education. These loans finance Educational Development Project (EDPITAF) in 1972, the Presidential Commission to Survey Philippine Education (PCSPE) in 1969, the Program for Decentralized Educational Development (PRODED) in 1981 to 1989. As pointed out by many critics, the massive penetration of WBIMF loans into the Philippine educational system has opened it wide to official and systematic foreign control, the perpetuation of U.S. and other foreign economic interests, and to maximize the efficiency of exploiting Philippine natural resources and skilled labor. The following are some of the reforms proposed. Number 1. Upgrade the teacher salary scale. Teachers have been underpaid, thus there is very little incentive for most of them to take up advanced trainings. 2. Amend the current system of budgeting for education across regions, which is based on participation rates and units cost. This clearly favors the more developed regions. There is a need to provide more allocation to lagging regions to narrow the disparity across regions. 3. Stop the current practice of subsidizing state universities and colleges to enhance access. This may not be the best way to promote equity, An expanded scholarship program giving more focus and priority to the poor may be more equitable. 4. Get all the leaders in business and industry to become actively involved in higher education. This is aimed at addressing the mismatch problem. In addition, carry out a selective admission policy, that is, installing mechanisms to reduce enrollment in oversubscribed courses and promoting enrollment in undersubscribed ones. Lastly, develop a rationalized apprenticeship program with heavy inputs from the private sector. Furthermore, transfer the control of technical training to industry groups which are more attuned to the needs of business and industry. First letter of Eugenio H. Lopez Sr. asking Marcos to save Meralco from bankruptcy. According from GMA News, Maki Pulido reported that in the first letter dated February 1973, Lopez Sr. informed the late dictator of their plans to sell their Meralco share to Meralco Foundation, which was composed of Meralco's employees and customers. An excerpt of the said letter: would like to offer sale of our holdings to a cooperative composed of Meralco employees, customers, and the general public that could be organized with the assistance government. "30 years ago, on February 22, 1986, then Jaime Cardinal Sin made an urgent call on church-owned Radio Veritas for Filipinos to take to the streets in support to revolt against President Ferdinand E. Marcos. For most Filipinos, Jaime Cardinal Sin's message was what started the People Power Revolution, which hundreds of thousands of supporters forming a human barricade between Camp Crame and Camp Aguinaldo, thereby protecting the rebels. Former President Fidel Ramos and Senator Juan Ponce Enrile. It was a show of force and a moment of truth for a nation that wanted freedom from the 20-year Marcos dictatorship. Historically, organized churches have been involved in electoral politics in the Philippines, including in the selection of candidates and church members who have run in elections themselves. The notion of a politics of religion refers to the increasing role that the religion plays in the politics of the contemporary world and the consequences that the politics of religion has on inclusive nation building, democracy, and human rights. During the Spanish colonial era, the Indio priest advocated for the secularization of the Catholic Church to allow native priests to head parishes. At that time, it was an act of treason that demanded the death penalty for only Filipinos. That is, Spaniards born in the Philippines were deemed to have the capacity to govern, and thus native priests could not serve as parish priests. Fast forward to the Marcos years and discussions on Vatican II, liberation theology, the student uprising in the 1960s and 1970s, community organizing, and the impact of martial law figured in the various discussions among the different religious congregations, including the Redemptorist community and the Jesuit mission. Vatican II saw the Catholic Church reawakening of the zeal to embark in new pastoral initiatives, such as serving the poor and the marginalized, and to solicit the contributions of the laity in pastoral care. The human rights violations under President Marcos and the increase in the number of desaparecidos, victims of human rights abuses who have disappeared, resulted in the collective anger and frustrations that exploded into the People Power movement. According to the Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility, from July 1973 to October 1984, there were at least 22 military raids on church establishments, 4 of them on institutions of the Protestant Church. Seminaries, Catholic schools, and other facilities were ransacked or closed. Priests, nuns, and laypersons were detained. Desaparecidos in Spanish means disappeared or missing. It is a term used for victims of forced or involuntary disappearances. Forced or involuntary disappearance is the secret abduction or imprisonment of a person. Most of the victims are political or union leaders or outspoken activists. While the People Power movement led to the downfall of President Marcos, the Catholic Church has remained a powerful opposing force on issues such as the Reproductive Health Bill and divorce. President Aquino signed the Reproductive Health Bill in December 2012, but it wasn't until 2014 that the Supreme Court declared it constitutional. The divorce bill is still caught up in a contentious battle. The Philippines is the only country in the world, aside from Vatican City, that lacks divorce laws. Historically, organized churches have been involved in electoral politics in the Philippines, including in the selection of candidates and church members who have run in elections themselves. For instance, the Iglesia Ni Cristo Church of Christ, with a tradition of block voting required from its 1 million voting members, has allegedly supported presidential candidates throughout history. President Marcos in 1986, Eduardo Cuangco in 1992, Joseph Estrada in 1998, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo in 2004, and Manny Villar in 2010. The Jesus is Lord movement ran campaigns themselves, Brother Eddie Villanueva in the 2004 presidential elections, where he won 3% of the votes, and most recently, the Filipino Movement for Transformational Leadership, PMTL, a community composed of Catholics, Protestants, and born-again groups bonded together to elect God-centered servants. For the May 2016 elections, the PMTL claims it can muster up to 10 million voters out of the 54.6 million Filipinos registered to vote. The Catholic Church, though not endorsing political candidates, exhorts the voters to vote according to one's conscience. In the launch of the One Good Vote campaign against bribery and vote buying, Luis Antonio Cardinal Tagle recalled the casting of ballots during the papal conclave and exhorted voters to pray and have a formulation based on one's religion. Iglesia Ni Cristo, whose members are required to vote as a bloc. Previous endorsements have failed. Eduardo Cuangco came in third. Estrada was ousted in 2001 because of corruption charges. Macapagal Arroyo had graft charges and is under hospital arrest. And Manny Villar lost the elections. And yet, despite a failed endorsement, candidates still trooped to the INC compound to get the blessing and votes of its executive minister. 1 million votes can certainly swing the tide in a hotly contested election. The 101-year-old church faces its worst crisis in years. Former ministers are accusing top leaders of corruption and illegal detention of members who dare question the INC. In July, it expelled the sibling and mother of its executive minister, Eduardo Manalo, for sowing disunity in the church. It also had a previous minister, Minorca, arrested for alleged illegal possession of a hand grenade. In August, it organized a protest rally against the Department of Justice supposed meddling into its internal affairs but drew flack instead from netizens and the general public who were stranded or suffered long commutes because protesters rendered EDSA impossible. Most recently, senatorial candidate Manny Pacquiao lost the endorsement of Nike and some voters as well, when he erred in making a slur against the LGBT community. Invoking Bible verses in his defense, he failed to realize that a prejudicial remark from any political candidates will not sit well with any group that still faces discrimination. But then again, his bigoted remark could work both ways. He will clearly lose the votes of the LGBT community and human rights advocates, but perhaps he will earn the votes of some ultra-conservatives.